So we're going to begin our recording of this Zoom event right now, which will be available on our csbc.com website for you to pass on to others. And we're excited to be able to make this resource available. We're going to request that you mute your microphone now and submit any questions via the Zoom chat room, where we'll have chat assistants assisting us today. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen and scroll over at the bottom, you'll see chat. Just hit that. Let us know you're here. And as Charlie is answering questions, sharing, please bring your questions up. He wants your questions. So with that, I'm going to begin. Welcome to another episode of Church Revitalization Resource, brought to you by the California Southern Baptist Convention Revitalization Team. And we are so glad to have you for another episode. If we have not met, my name is Ralph Neighbor, your host today, and very excited for the topic today of updated legal issues in a post-COVID era for pastors and leaders in churches all across the United States here. 20-some years ago, I found myself as a pastor being served papers for a lawsuit related to sexual abuse by a staff member with underage girls. The experience, needless to say, knocked the wind out of me. It lasted for 3 solid years. And I promised myself, if I could ever help pastors avoid the pitfalls of legal issues, I would. Little did I realize that many years later, it was Church West Insurance that helped me through that legal maze. And that's why I have the great honor today to introduce my friend, President and CEO of Church West Insurance here in California. He's a great friend of California pastors, has helped countless of pastors stay out of the weeds of legal issues and then get through them if they get into it. Charlie Cutler, welcome to Count the Cost Resources. We can't hear you, Charlie. I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, there we go.
Myself.
Thank you.
I was listening. I'm a good direction follower. You told everybody to mute themselves. I muted it. I'm unmuting now.
Well, hey, before we begin, I'm so excited to announce something. If you will stay with us to the end of the program, you're going to get a special link. Tell us about that link, Charlie.
Oh, you're giving away the good stuff.
Well, we're not going to tell them all of it, but tell them what they can expect if they'll wait till the end.
Well, we've got some free legal assistance for people, because we're going to be talking about 5 or 6 legal issues that we're facing. A lot of them are specific to California and particularly problematic in California. And, as you have questions or something specific to your ministry and you're looking for legal assistance, we're going to have places you can submit documents to have an attorney review them for you, or if you have questions like a Q&A and want a free conversation with an attorney, we'll have that for you if you want to dig in deeper and talk a little bit more about your ministry specifically.
Well, take it away, Charlie.
I will. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you having me. I appreciate everybody for being here today. And as I said, or as Ralph said, we're going to be recording this, sending it out to everybody. I'm also going to be including the slide deck so that you'll have that, so you don't need to take notes. And in addition to having just the slide deck, I'm going to have some links in there to some helpful resources that I'll mention as we go along. And so there will be quite a few resources here as well. So anyway, let me get started just a little bit, make sure you can see the screen okay. Looks good? Yes?
Looks good.
All right, good. Okay. Updated legal and liability issues for ministries. And like Ralph said, I am Charlie from Church West. This is the whole team. It's not just me. We've got a great crew of people. Our office is in Redlands, and but we have people that live throughout the state. We serve over 4,000 ministries in California, and we're the primary agent for Brotherhood Mutual in California. So I'll send this to you just so you have the information about our agency, our team, and so that you learn a little bit about Brotherhood Mutual as well. And when I talk about coverage issues, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the perspective from how their coverage might apply and how we've traditionally seen claims handled there. I can't speak for every insurance company because every insurance company writes their own policies and does them a little bit differently, and their liability responds in a different way. So I know this is like the really exciting stuff. I enjoy teaching about this, and when I'm at Gateway Seminary, formerly known as Golden Gate, and then at Cal Baptist, I meet with the students there because as you're going into ministry, we don't sit and talk about insurance very much. We talk about ministry, and then people come out and, you know, they're running a large organization. So I'm at their church. And so I want to get into just kind of a couple of basics and then, you know, really get into it. So, you know, insurance, two things, property and liability. We're going to be focusing on liability today, and property insurance covers your building, your properties, you know, your stuff, things that you have. Liability is more of what you do. And if you're negligent, somebody's damaged, then the insurance company pays covered claims. And so property and liability. But people are oftentimes, you know, worried, especially in California, about our liability, or people say we can't do things in a church. And one thing you'll find with us, we don't sit there and we're not sitting there saying, no, you can't do that. We try to find ways when you come up with a ministry to do it safely. And to still reach the community as you're called. So you won't hear from us, no, you can't do that. So we try to work through that with you. So the basis of negligence, and what we hear from a lot of people is, you know, board member says we can't do that, it's too risky. But there's three components in order for you to be negligent. And the three components, and I really focus on these a lot, is the duty, the breach, and the damage. And I'll give you a couple of examples on these. But, you know, the duty is your duty of care. The breach of that duty is when somebody's injured and you mess up. And, you know, we all make mistakes, and, you know, accidents happen. And then the last thing is damage. And damage means somebody would be damaged and they would hold the church responsible. So I'll give you an example. And I saw somebody in a Padres hat. Did we have somebody from San Diego? I think so. Mark, then you know Black's Beach, right? Okay. Well, Black's Beach is in San Diego. And one time a church had their scout troop go on a nature hike, and the person that was taking them on a nature hike took them to Black's Beach in San Diego. I received a phone call the next day because the administrator of the church called me up, and she goes, Charlie, I've got the news van on their way to the church right now because we took our kids to Black's Beach. Mark, he probably knows. He doesn't know this, but Black's Beach is a clothing optional beach in San Diego. So when I got the phone call from the church and they said, hey, we've got the news van on our way here because we accidentally took our Boy Scout troop to a beach and we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know that it was going to be clothing optional. Created a real problem. So turns out what had happened is the guy was new to the area. He saw a nature preserve, didn't realize what kind of a nature preserve it was. He planned the event, didn't check with anybody at the church that knew. He went there to check it out to make sure it was a safe place. He went on a cold day. And when he went on a cold day, everything was fine. No, you know, nobody was out there doing anything. Everybody was fully clothed. Well, when he went back with the youth, it was an unseasonably warm spring day. And he gets out there and he's got this group of Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts with him. And he didn't know what kind of a mess he walked into.
Oh my goodness.
And in this, then what happened afterwards is we had, you know, one of the moms from the scout troop. She found out later on, and she was just, you know, mad as a hornet.
Oh,
came back
gosh.
and she said, I'm going to sue you. I'm so upset. And, you know, this, that, the other thing. And the church was worried, and they're saying, oh, we're going to get sued. What's going to happen? In this situation, you have those three liability principles. You know, What's your duty? Well, your duty is to take youth to a place that's appropriate for you. What is the breach of that duty? Well, the breach is when you took them to a place that was not appropriate for youth to go to. And then the last question was damage. And the damage in this situation, I mean, there really wasn't any. The kids weren't damaged, and no lawyers came after the church. They made a mistake. They learned from it. I think the only mistake that could have been made is that the person that was leading this troop, when you started searching his name later on, it would pop up that he took a bunch of youth to a nude beach. And so he may have been damaged a little bit, but the church wasn't damaged. The kids weren't damaged. There was a mom that was upset. But the interesting thing here, and the thing that I want to point out, if you look at it, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but it says top story of 5. And this was not a top story. This was, in my opinion, there's a lot of news going on, but because it involved youth, it involved nudity, it involved sex, it involved the church, you bet it was the top story at 5 o'clock. And to this day, this church is still kind of known in the community as the church that took the kids to the nude beach. And we get that kind of reputation when we make a mistake and it becomes really visible. We don't have the top story at 5 about the outreach that they're doing or the great things that are happening at that church. It's when we make a mistake. And so I think that's where the damage may have been. So we want to prevent those types of things. And I'll talk a little bit more about duty, breach, and damage as we kind of look at other areas. As we go here, this is one that's quite a bit more serious, where somebody was leaving the church, and as they left the church on a Sunday, somebody was injured. The gate came swinging open and went through the windshield of the car. Somebody was hurt. They sustained pretty severe damages. But their duty is that when people come to the church, that it's a safe place for worship. Their duty is also to make sure that the gate is properly secured. The damage was when the breach of that duty was when the gate swung open and somebody was injured. And then the damages were significant, and somebody was seriously impacted for the rest of their life. And the church could have done things better. And, we're not always going to be perfect, but we want to work to do things a little bit better. So it's kind of, as you look at those, one's kind of a silly situation with the duty, breach, and damage. And then the others where we really see some damages where somebody's severely impacted. So I'll get into those a little bit. But one of the things that makes it so challenging at a church is that you look at this and I ask the question, how is your church regulated? And we're not. Largely we're not regulated. Let me just say something. That was before the pandemic. We've been a little more regulated now, but before the pandemic, we aren't regulated. A lot of it is because of the separation of church and state, and people don't come in and say, how are you operating your Sunday services? How are you operating your youth ministry activities? Preschools are going to be regulated. If you have a cafe, that might be regulated. But there's not upfront regulation as your ministry is getting started. Restaurants are regulated. Insurance agencies are regulated. Everything is regulated out there, really, except for churches. And there is a way that we're actually regulated, and it's afterwards. And it's after a mistake happens, and we're regulated through litigation. And it's once you've made a mistake, if somebody comes to you and somebody was injured, they're going to say, okay, well, what were you doing to prevent this incident from happening? And they're going to say, did you work to protect the participants in your ministry activity in the same way that similar organizations in the community would do so? Other churches, schools, ministries of those types. Ralph, does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Yeah. So what they'll do later on is they'll say, okay, Pastor, what were your ratios of supervising youth? What was your, did you screen people? Had you managed your facility? It's not like that in other businesses. Restaurants get inspected by food inspectors. And, everybody else is licensed. Churches aren't. The only way that you were regulated is after an incident happens and it's you being deposed as the pastor, or you're sitting there on the witness stand.
That's
and
interesting.
We need to make sure that we're meeting the same standard of care. And we cherish the First Amendment. And we appreciate that separation of church and state, but it doesn't mean that we aren't held accountable later on to do things the way that we should. And we've got a lot of resources for you in our office. And I'll be sending all those out to everybody too. Okay. This just came out. If you read the Church Law and Tax Report, and I'm going to refer to this a couple of times, but the Church Law and Tax Report publishes something that Richard Hammer puts out. This talks about the top 5 reasons that churches end up in court. And, this number one thing, the abuse of minor, property disputes, personal injury, we'll get into these just a little bit deeper on each one of them. But, looking back, and I pulled one of their old infographics, and if you look at this, and I think as far back as 2006, with the exception of 2016, sexual abuse of a minor has been the top reason why churches are ending up in court. And so I want to focus a little bit on that at the beginning and tell you how that has changed. In California, this is something that's really challenging, and not a lot of people are aware of this, but the statute of limitations in California has changed. As of January 1st of 2020, the statute of limitations changed from 6 years to 22 years. It used to be that if a child was injured at the age of, let's say they were 12 years old, they turned 18, the clock starts ticking. They would have another 6 years until an abuse claim would be made. That's been extended from 6 years to 22 years. And so now, as ministry leaders, we're ultimately responsible for what happens up until the child turns 40 years old to defend ourselves. And right now, between now and January 1st of 2023, there's actually no statute of limitations. Ralph, most of the people on the call are from California, right?
Most of them are, yes.
Okay. Since January 1st of this year, actually the first 2 months of this year, there were over 300 abuse claims filed against churches. We've been defending some of them, and you've got to go back and imagine if you had to defend an incident that happened in the 80s, and it's really, really difficult to do that. What we also want to watch for is that, let me go back real quick.
So is this
grandfathered?
Is this grandfathered, Charlie? This new law, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, the removing of the statute of limitations. Yeah, we've
Right.
all been, all of us in the church, we get calls all the time from churches that say, hey, how long do we need to keep background check information? How long do we need to keep incident reports? How long do we need to, document everything that happened at a church? It used to be, 7 years, because you had 6 years of statute of limitations. Now it's forever. And eventually it's going to be 22 years. So we've got it's kind of the direction that we're going to be going. But if you look at this, see this green little umbrella here?
Yes.
It says insurance coverage disputes. That's something that's happened. A lot of insurance companies are looking and they're saying, gee, what's going on in California? We don't want to be a part of that. We're on the hook forever. We expect a claim to happen and we pay it out. They don't know that they're going to have to defend you years and years later. So I'm going to go back to where I was. And again, I'm going to be sending this to everybody. So you have it. And I don't want to read slides. We can all read. But I'm going to send this to you. And I just want to go over something. When it talks about insurance coverage disputes, it's because a church finds out they've been served for something that happened in the 80s. And this is happening over and over again right now. And I'm dealing with this all the time. Is that then they go to their insurance company and they say, hey, I just got served in 2021 for something that happened in 1988. Defend me. And the insurance companies are now saying, you've got to go to the insurance company that insured you then when the occurrence happened. And so you go back to that insurance company, and that insurance company said, well, we didn't write that coverage, or we had limitations, or they might even say, well, we only wrote temporary coverage. And so you've really got to look at the form. You want to have that conversation with your agent and say, and I just highlighted a couple things, but it says, additional special coverage must be obtained in advance in order for a future claim to be covered by the insurer. So you really want to look at this now and say, hey, how far back does our prior acts coverage go? Do we have defense? Did we have coverage then? But and this is unique to California, and it's because our Ralph's buddies in Sacramento keep changing the laws on us, so it's tough for us to keep up. And and so now you're paying for more. You've got more exposure. We got 22 years of exposure at this point.
So how does someone here on this Zoom call know if they have that additional special coverage that is needed?
I'll tell you what I would do, and the people in my office, because I know some people from our office have joined the call today. They're fans of yours, Ralph.
Oh, thank you.
But I would call our office and say, hey, you know what? Will you send me a copy of every declarations page? I'd build a file and make sure you have copies of all your old insurance policies. I personally go out all the time to ministries that I serve, and I'm saying, here's your new policy. Let's grab your old one. Let's put it in a safe place. Good thing about Baptists is Baptists don't throw things away. So we hold on to everything, and so there's good documentation there. But you move sometime, or you get a new, somebody new comes in, they go, oh, we can throw away all those files. You want to get copies of all of your old insurance policies. You can call your agent and get copies of those and hold on to them. Okay. All right. I'm going to go into the 10 steps for preventing abuse. And I'm going to be sending this to you. This is a PDF, and the PDF is going to have links that you can click on the links. It'll take you directly to some resources. So remember I said that we need to meet the standard of care of other youth-serving organizations, and it's tough as a church because it's like, what exactly is it that we're supposed to do? The CDC put out guidelines, and they've kind of remained unchanged for the past 7 or 8 years, but they have a guide for preventing child sexual abuse among youth-serving organizations. This is really what you should be using, because in the event of a lawsuit, they're going to come to you and they're going to go, okay, Pastor Ralph, what did you do? Did you do an application? Did you do an interview? Did you interview the person? And and sit and talk to them. Hey, why are you called to serve in this area? Reference checks, background checks, 6-month or even a 1-year rule, meaning, hey, let's make sure that they've been around for at least a year. And part of the church before we start sending them off with you. So these 5 things are the first, I think, really important. And that's part of the selection process and who you're going to be selecting. And I'd like you to look at this and make sure that you're selecting them in the right way. And I think that the CDC does a really good job of it. I'm going to provide this resource for you kind of as a guide to go through. Okay. The next 5 things are really more about the supervision. So in order to be negligent, you've got to be held responsible for your selection process and your supervision process. And, never alone, or the 2 adults or the rule of 3 policy. That's, just making sure that kids aren't alone with an adult. You do everything that you can to make sure that we're in a public space, that people aren't being isolated. And we want to make sure that we're doing all of the right training. The social media guidelines, this is something not included in the CDC guidance. I'm sending you a separate social media guidelines on how we should be interacting with kids on social media, because what it used to be is that bad guys would be coming to the church, and they would be, grooming children, or they would find opportunities to gain access to children. Now they're using social media. Now they're using screens, and they're using Instagram, or they're communicating with kids directly. And you want to make sure that your leaders, that your people in the church are doing that in the appropriate way. So I'm going to send you some social media guidelines here too. I'm just going to ask, well, I'll get into this in just a second, but talk a little bit about mandated reporter training. And then your policy, you should have a written policy. So many things that we do in a church, it's part of our culture. We do the right things, but we don't write them down. And I think it's really important, and I'll be sending you a link to a sample written policy that you can utilize to just formalize the processes that you do. Because most churches are doing the right things, but unless you write it down, I think it's hard to follow those. And I think it's also wise to have them reviewed by an attorney. As was mentioned at the beginning of the session today, we are going to have an attorney that will review those for you for free. And so they're going to be looking at a checklist. There might be 15 things that should be on that list. And they're going to say, okay, of these 15 things, you're doing 10 of them. And, check. The attorney's going to review it for you at no charge, nothing like that. They're going to check those 10 items for you. And then there might be 5 that you're missing or that could be tweaked or adjusted a little bit. We're going to give you links to sample wording and sample programs that you can use to implement it so that you have a more solid program that will comply with the CDC guidelines.
Charlie, just real quick, I think I may have told you that when I was at 5:30 in the morning being learning how to be deposed, and I told the lawyer downtown in LA, I said, can you give me one key thing that could help me as a pastor in this area? And he said, yes. If you go by a classroom and you see a teacher alone with another child, stop and ask, why are you here?
Yeah.
He said, what we miss is the obvious. And if a leader will simply go, wait a minute, this is not right, I need to say something, instead of going, well, I won't say anything and I'll talk about it later. He said, it's just that kind of observation that you train your leadership to do.
You're absolutely right. And more often than not, you have somebody in your congregation that can lead this for you. Because let me tell you,
Yes.
every other youth serving organization out there does these things. And they're required to do it. And somebody that might be a teacher, somebody that might work, in sports with youth or something like that, they're used to it. Let them take it over. You be a part of it. You lead it. Hold them accountable. But let them do the kind of the nuts and bolts of something like this.
There you go.
So, okay. All right. And then also, I want to be sure that everybody is aware that really we're all mandated reporters in California. There's different types of abuse that you are responsible for reporting: physical, emotional, sexual, or neglect. There is training that's available. I'll send you a link to that. And it's substantial, but it's something that really, as clergy, I think clergy should go through it. But I think that it's also very helpful that you have some of your youth leaders are a part of that as well. And if you ever do run into these situations, you can call us, you can call our attorneys, and we can guide you through it, whether it's a claim or not. Because really, I'll tell you this, if somebody has, and this is the key thing, and it's mentioned over and over and over again in the law when it talks about mandated reporting, it says, do you have a reasonable suspicion? So if, Pastor Ralph calls me up and he goes, Charlie, something happened and I heard about it, or I saw something, or, whatever it was. And I was like, okay, are you suspicious, Ralph? Yes. I said, okay. Are you a reasonable person? Yes. Then it's a reasonable suspicion. Call local law enforcement, walk them through it. You don't want to err on the other side. And that's where so many churches have fallen short. And it's not just the Catholic Church, it's everybody that's fallen short about reporting incidents, whether they happen at the church or off the premises. But we need to err on the side of protecting children and work with law enforcement. And generally speaking, they do a pretty good job of investigating these things. Okay. All right. All right, enough of that. I know we talked a lot about abuse, but it is the number one issue. I really want to make sure that you have the resources that we're providing, and those will all be sent out to everybody.
And those people who are listening right now, I guarantee you, someone on this call has said, "Oh, I've got somebody, and I'm not sure if I should bring it up." What should they do, Charlie?
You mean not sure if they should be working with you, or they?
No, they're not sure. They've got an issue that they've seen, and they're not sure if they should bring it up. Can they contact legal advice?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if it's an abuse situation, I'd go talk to local law enforcement, even have a cup of coffee with them and say, guys, how should I handle this? The attorneys that we work with, they can guide you as well through this. If you know that something happens, if you've been notified, then you want to be turning in a claim.
Yep.
As well, and getting the insurance company involved. But yeah, absolutely.
Oh, here's a question that just came up. How do we monitor virtual classrooms due to COVID? Many of our classes are online.
Well, I'll tell you the good thing about the classes is that it's nice that you're not in person, but you're minimizing that isolation. You're able to reach more people. We're able to have more people there. And the key to a lot of these supervision issues, and I'll go back to it, is that if you look at this, never alone, supervision and safety training, social media guidelines, a lot of it is it's minimizing isolation. And the nice thing about technology is that we have group chats, we have group Zoom meetings, we have everybody there together. You can record them as well. They record them to the computer and save them for a while if anything were ever to come up. But I think it's a good idea to, just to record those. But with monitoring those, and you should be using the password protections. Sometimes we get some, that was kind of, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were seeing a lot of that, where people would crash Zoom meetings.
Right.
You want to be careful because some people might kind of crash your youth group meeting that's online. Okay. All right. Our most frequent liability claims. All right. Remember this? We looked at the top 5 reasons why churches end up in court. The most frequent one that we actually end up happening, and these end up happening, is when somebody gets injured in a church. And this, especially as we're coming back to church, we want to make sure that it's been maintained, that things have been updated. And the insurance policy is typically going to respond and cover those out-of-pocket medical expenses. And if they're really injured and they've got severe damages, then it becomes a liability claim. But the key thing that I want to say in this situation where we see claims get problematic is when somebody, churches are sometimes afraid to reach out to somebody if they've been injured at a church. They've been injured on their property, injured during one of their activities. We want to make sure that they're receiving the same pastoral care that you would do if they were injured off premises. You want a pastor to reach out to them. Hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Is there anything we can do? Is there anything that we can help you out with? And I think in California, and sometimes board members are a little bit too concerned that if they reach out to somebody and try to help them after they've been injured at an activity, that they're admitting liability or it creates more liability. And I think the opposite of that is true. If you don't forget that you're a church, I say that's the right way. Yeah, just don't forget that you're a church. Don't be
That's
afraid
good.
to reach out to somebody.
That's good.
And make sure you're serving them well. Because that's where we see lawsuits sometimes. And I've read it in depositions where they were like, I've been going to this church forever and I got hurt at the church. And next thing I know, I was shunned, and we don't want to do that. So, you want to document incidents that happens. And please, the key thing on this is just don't be afraid to care for somebody that's injured. And let your insurance company know. You want to have a record of that and we can step in and help. Sometimes if there's if there's head injuries or if somebody goes away in an ambulance, you want to definitely get the insurance company involved. Sometimes if there's problematic people, Mark Kuhn, what is the statute of limitations on injuries? The insurance policy responds within a year on medical issues, and then the liability issues, it can be, I want to say it's 3 years. That's a good question for the legal resource that we're going to provide to everybody afterwards. But the statute of limitations on injuries and insurance coverage is a year for medical issues, and I want to say it's 3. I don't know that one's changing. So, but you want to document this for and hold those records forever. Thank you. Good question on that. All right. Most frequent lawsuits in California. All right. We saw this right here. The top 5 reasons that churches end up in court. In California, the most frequent lawsuits are actually employment disputes. And we don't see that in other states. There are, we're receiving things, at least weekly, employment situations that come up among our 4,000 churches. But we have issues with wage and hour issues, wrongful termination, a hostile work environment. With the Me Too movement, people have had claims that have been going on, or claims that have been reported many years later. They say, hey, this happened at the church. I worked with Pastor Ralph 15 years ago, and he was abusive, and he was mean, and it was a hostile work environment, and I've been suffering these emotional damages all this time. And that's why I'm in the situation that I'm in now. And so, and I'm not really saying that, Pastor Ralph. I could.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate you clarifying that.
Sure. Those claims can last years, but and a question came up from Mark about churches being at-will employers, and you are, but many things that we do as part of a culture of a church is we are waiving our protections as at-will employers. And we all know other ministries that have had situations, and they will say something was said, something was implied, that creates more and more liability. And so, Mark, we are at-will employers, but really the courts don't respond that way, and the attorneys don't respond that way. You're still held liable, and it's the number one reason why we're seeing it. Wage and hour issues are a big. Yes, sir.
No, go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
Well, I'm actually, when I send this back out to you, because there's a lot to cover, we've got some resources on exempt versus non-exempt employees. What's happened with AB 95 and independent contractors. I've got a lot of resources that we wouldn't be able to cover all in the day-to-day, today. But I think that it's a helpful resource and something for your church to work on.
I think one of the things that I've gotten the most, Charlie, during the pandemic is we've had many churches were not able to keep employees on the payroll, and they had to let them go. And I've gotten a number of questions related to I let someone go, I didn't do it right, now I'm being sued. What do I do? In fact, I sent one to you early on in that. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And I don't think pastors and leaders in churches really understand the importance of how to let someone go in their church if they're on paid staff.
Well, I think one of the most important things to do is if you're going to be letting somebody go, I check with an attorney beforehand and just chat through it with them and say, look, we're letting this guy Ralph go. He's just not doing the job. We can't afford him. We're gonna let him go. And I will tell you that for clergy, you don't have very many rights. Everybody else has a lot more protection. So clergy you can fire for just about any reason or no reason at all. But everybody else is a little more protected. You want to have an attorney guide you through that. I think it's really important to have an employee handbook that's reviewed. Again, that's something that you send to us. Send us your employee handbook, no matter how bad condition it's in, because it evolves. A couple times a year it should be updated, really, because the laws are changing in California. But send it to us. We'll have the attorneys review it. There's about 40 things that they check for. There's no charge for that. They'll say, hey, yes, you have this, or no, you don't. And then they'll provide suggestions for you on how to improve it.
And if
But
they
this is
don't
here
have
where
a
I
hand,
talk-
if they don't have a handbook, Charlie, what would you recommend?
We've had a model employee handbook on our website for years, and it's just in recent years, I think that each church is so unique. I think that you should bring somebody on, and it sounds like a lot of money, but for about $1,000, you could have somebody write an employee handbook for you. Just the templates out there. The California Chamber of Commerce, they have a model employee handbook. Guess what? It's wrong. It doesn't work for churches. And it doesn't work for churches because churches are exempt from a lot of things. Churches, the first thing that it's going to say is this is how you cannot discriminate. Well, churches can discriminate based on faith-based principles. And so I think that a lot of the templates that are out there actually create more liability, and you lose a lot of your protections as a religious organization. I do think it's worth it to spend $1,000 and have somebody come and meet with you and really get to understand your church and write that employee handbook for you. Because the free stuff online, it creates problems, and I think that it's too important, especially if you have a preschool or a large staff. Get somebody in to do that. We have an HR consultant that works with just churches that does a great job of it.
Great.
Okay. I mentioned that severance and release agreement when terminating, and then also it's law in California that you have harassment prevention training for all employees.
Yes.
And yes, so but we'll send you quite a few resources about independent contractors. Just become engaged. We have a webinar every other week on HR issues at our church. Whoever's in charge of that, have them join in, and we've got, I think, really great people, and we make sure that everything that we do is authoritative and actionable. So that we provide you with the resources afterwards to help you implement those at your church. But I will tell you, employment issues, more and more and more, and it's really tough in California. Okay, sound good, Ralph?
Sounds good.
All right. I feel like I'm coming down, like I'm bringing people down. There's great stuff happening in church. We're coming out of the pandemic strong. I'm excited. As I'm talking with churches right now, we're finding, new ways to reach people. And so, but I want to protect you as you're going through that. So I do. And KB Williams says, what about small churches under 100? Under 100 people, you should still have that child protection program. If you have employees, and even if you have just, one employee, you should write that employee handbook out. That's kind of the rules of the agreement. I think we should all be accountable to one another. And I think it's good to put that in writing. And I had a question here. It says, please explain more why pastors' employment status is different from regular employees. I like that. We had a session on that, and I'm sending you all the link about the ministerial exception. And it was a Supreme Court decision that basically said the courts are not going to decide who is standing behind the pulpit. And it's not their job. It's not their role. They're not going to get into that. And so what they will be doing is, if it's a pastor, if it's somebody that's preaching, teaching, marrying, bearing, they're probably not going to get involved in that situation. Actually, they're not going to get involved in that.
But regular employees, let's say that would be administrative assistants, maybe somebody who's taking care of the grounds, they fall into a different category, correct?
It does, but really it's almost just this. In some areas, it's just the senior pastor that has very little protection. Others, it might be a choir director, it might be a youth leader, it might be somebody else that's still active in ministry. You can still have liability in those situations. Okay. I think that the higher up you go, from the pastor, the less protection they have as an employee, and the more protection you have as a church. So if they're really just, but it varies. Okay. All right, the largest lawsuits involving religious organizations, and if we don't include the Catholic Church, and this is something that I want to, normally I'd have everybody here and we could do a quiz and we'd ask, but I'll throw Mark under the bus because when we first got on the call today, he was in his car. And I'm going to tell you that the largest lawsuits that we see here in California is involving vehicles. And these are the claims that we have. And as a church, when you send somebody out in a vehicle, if you say, hey, KB, I want you to get in this vehicle and you're going to go to camp, or whatever it is, your church is responsible. When a church is saying we're going to be carpooling and we're going to start organizing things, you want to make sure a couple of things. And again, I'm going to send you a link to this. Number one, you want to make sure that the driver is an appropriate driver, because you have a duty to make sure that that driver is appropriate to drive the vehicle, that they don't have any situations. I'll tell you a situation that we had where somebody was a narcoleptic, and they had been asked by the pastor to pick up some items for the church. Hopped in the church-owned vehicle. Pastor didn't ask him, hey, do you have a driver's license? Do you have any medical issues that prevent you from driving a vehicle safely? How many DUIs have you had, or how many tickets or at-fault accidents or anything like that? We don't do that. We're a family. We just kind of say, hey, can you go do something? And the guy said, sure. He was stopped at a stoplight, and he fell asleep, put his foot on the accelerator, ran into two people, and the church was responsible. And it's one of those things that could have been avoided. And these are the largest lawsuits that we have over and over and over again. It's the ones that are involving vehicles. I know that we hear about abuse claims. Those are devastating in so many ways. But the large issues is when you have people that are driving. So what I'm going to be sending to everybody is a sample vehicle use policy that says, all right, Ralph, when you're driving, no texting and driving. I know it's silly that we have to tell people that, but it's something that you have to do. The other thing is make sure that everybody's wearing their seatbelt and all of those things. It's just how we should be using a vehicle on behalf of the church. The other thing is just a self-disclosure form. You're just asking people if they're an appropriate driver. It's great to do background checks or to do DMV checks. And if you own vehicles, like church buses and things like that, I definitely would be participating in the DMV program where they notify you. Okay, but your duty is to make sure that the vehicle is appropriate and the driver is appropriate. Your breach of that duty is if there's an accident, and then the damages. Joe asked a question here. It says, how about having a regular attendee who's not an official church member drive our church members with his or her own vehicle? Would court frown on that? That's the way churches operate. But when somebody is driving on behalf of the church, whether they're a member or just a regular attendee or whatever it might be, the church is ultimately going to be held responsible for it. So we just want to do the basics. And the basics are, tell us about how you are as a driver and your qualifications. And then the other thing is saying, hey, this is how we operate. This is how we operate vehicles on behalf of the church. Okay. All right. And then somebody says, what is the church's liability if parents volunteers to use their personal vehicle and drive several youth to a retreat? You are responsible for what happens in that vehicle when that person drives. So these are the people. I'm not talking just about church-owned vehicles. I'm talking about loaned vehicles, borrowed vehicles, rented vehicles, anybody that's driving on behalf of the church. So let's say that Pastor Ralph, says, hey, we're going to be going to, I'd say we're going to a Padres game. We're not going to waste our time and go to a Dodgers game. So we're going to go to a Padres game, and we're all going to meet at the church. Okay. So we're going to meet at the church, and I'm sitting there, and I'm Pastor Ralph, and I say, okay, you guys go in that vehicle, you guys go in that vehicle, you guys go in that vehicle. As soon as you put somebody in that vehicle, you're responsible for for that driver to make sure that the driver is appropriate. And too often what we've had happen is somebody has had a suspended license or excessive tickets. And these aren't things that people advertise when they come to the church. When Ralph comes to me and says, hey, Charlie, will you drive the kids to a Padres game? I'm going to say, sure, no problem. I may not tell him that I have a lead foot or that I've had a couple of accidents, and the church is going to be responsible for that. So it's a simple ask. And then Joe's asking, typically would our church insurance cover non-members drivers? Yes, generally speaking, we would include something that's called non-owned and hired auto liability. What it means, it's covering the ministry's liability for vehicles that aren't owned by the church, but are used on the church's behalf, or they're doing something on behalf of the church. You know, that Ralph's asked somebody, they say, hey, will you run to Home Depot and pick up some plywood, if anybody can afford plywood nowadays. But if you can run to Home Depot and pick up some plywood, he's involved in a car accident on the way, hits a lady in the crosswalk. They're going to say, well, we're going to sue him. Ralph's insurance is going to come first. Okay. So his insurance is primary, and then the church's insurance policy would respond above and beyond that. And believe me, they're going to come after the church because the church has the assets. Okay. So your duty, breach, and damage, I think this really makes sense. And we look at this with all ministry activities is, what is your duty and what can we do to, protect these people that are, that we've been entrusted with. Okay. Sound good? Okay. All right. I'm going to get into a couple of other liability issues. And we can chat about this if there's questions that come up, but these are the ones that are really coming up. We've been working on this. We've had church security conferences and church training activities. And this question, and the question that I look at is I say, are they required by law for a church security team? And, obviously we don't have people that are coming to enforce things. And, you're not at your First Baptist Church and the local city comes in and says, well, where's your security team? You have to have them. But remember, in court later on, they're going to say to you, they're going to say, okay, did you meet the standard of care of other similar organizations in the community? So let's say you have a large gathering. You have a harvest festival, and you're inviting the whole community that's going to be there. Any other organization that would have a gathering like that in the community would have a security presence there. And I'm not talking about having armed guards and things like that. I'm talking about people responsible for the security of an event. Churches should be doing the same thing. You should have somebody there that's responsible for security, because we're seeing other organizations where there's large gatherings where you're going to have a security presence there. Did that make sense, or did I complicate it, Ralph?
Nope.
Okay. All right.
And armed or unarmed, that's a big deal right now, isn't it?
It is. And, a lot of times that's one of the first questions people ask, or they'll say, hey, we're putting a security team together. So I asked Ralph to go get his concealed carry permit, and, now we're in good shape. And, and it's what people want to do. We've got to have somebody armed at the church. It's where they start. And it is a question that you should be asking, but it should be a question that you're asking way down the road. We have some good guidelines on our website about the things that you should be doing. And again, it's having a formal team that's ready to respond to medical situations, which is really your safety and security team should be ready to respond to medical situations. You should have a plan in place for responding if there was ever an intruder. And then if they're armed or unarmed, you want to have that conversation with your insurance company, because some insurance companies will exclude it and others, will cover it. And I think that you really want to, you also need to be aware about whether or not you're in a gun-free zone. We've had, if you have a church with a school, that's considered a gun-free zone in California. If you're near a school, it's a gun-free zone as well. Okay. COVID-19, I'm excited we're getting back to worship.
Yes.
We've got some resources for you on getting back to worship. We've got, I think June 15th is when the virus is going away. We're done with it, right? It's gone. No, it's actually June 15th. We're open again. There's fewer restrictions, but I think that there's some best practices that we should be following. We have guidelines on reopening on the website. We have another webinar next week that is going to be about what we're supposed to be doing, because the CDC and OSHA are still just coming out with the guidelines right now. But really what it's saying is that when you're at the church starting next Sunday, not this coming Sunday, the following Sunday, what you should be doing is you should be saying, okay, are you vaccinated? You're vaccinated? Great. Go sit over there. No mask. Are you unvaccinated or you don't want to tell me? You need to sit over there. You need to wear a mask and you need to be socially distanced. That's what it says in California right now. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be changing in the next couple of weeks. I'd encourage you to kind of join us in the sessions that we have coming up, where we dig in deep on COVID. The question about liability if somebody contracts it, that has come up quite a bit. We've seen situations, we've had claims turned in, and we haven't seen those claims go anywhere. Where you do need to be ready for it, and KB asked what happens when somebody comes back and tests positive. You should still be working with local health authorities to do contact tracing. That hasn't gone away. If you have a school, that's when the school might be shut down. You need to work with licensing on whether or not that class needs to be shut down. Okay. And then vaccines, that's a big issue. We did a whole session on that. So when I send this out to you, you're going to have links to some resources on each one of these issues. We could talk all day. Ralph and I do sometimes.
Thank you.
And so really, you look at this, what's your duty? Your duty is to make it a safe place for worship. The breach of that duty is if somebody gets injured in a security situation or COVID, and then damages. And with COVID, it's really tough to determine causation. That's what the courts are going to look at. They're going to say, did it really happen at the church? We had one situation where actually people died that contracted COVID. It was a large church service at the beginning of the pandemic, and they had 14 people that came down with it that were all at the same church service. And there were some people that passed away due to complications from COVID. And people were looking at the church, and the courts showed up at the church. I'm sorry, the press showed up at the church. Turns out that those people were all carpooling together. They lived in the same senior living together, and it wasn't necessarily caused at the church. So I doubt that there's going to be liability, but we'll see. Okay. All right. Again, great things are happening at churches right now. We want to help facilitate it. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about property, and there's some unique things in California, property insurance and what we're seeing happening right now. Our most common claims, it's water damage, it's broken pipes, kids flush something down the toilet overflows, and it's just a mess that you have to clean up. But I'll tell you what we're seeing more and more of. This is a situation that happened at a church where it was, wind blew shingles off of the roof. After the shingles came off of the roof, water got in. It was a covered claim, $90,000, not a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal. But insurance companies pay these claims all the time. What got complicated is that the city then came in and they said, oh, wait a second, before you put those shingles on, don't replace them with the shingles that you had there before. We've got these new shingles, and these new shingles are green, and not the color green, but they're environmentally green, and they're made out of tofu. Wow, these new shingles that are green, and it's and recycled tires. These new shingles, green, lighter, and that's the key thing that they said there was lighter. Then they said, well, oh, by the way, the beams that are supporting your roof in the sanctuary, they're not strong enough to hold these new lighter shingles. And it doesn't meet code. And so you're going to have to replace the wooden beams that you have with steel beams. So that $90,000 claim ended up being an additional $900,000 to bring it up to code. And this we see in California. If you're in the Bay Area, it hits you really, really hard. There is insurance for this. You want to check it. And that's the conversation that you should be having with your agents. Like, hey, if something happens, how much coverage do I have in the event that the city comes in and says, hey, you've got to put sprinklers in, you've got to do ADA access, you've got to replace all of your insulation with something that's to code right now. So it can get really, really expensive. I have one Bay Area church that we're on a claim. It's about $3 million to bring the building up to code. So it can get very expensive. Okay. The other thing is with the fires that we've had, this is one church that had a fire a couple of years ago, and it didn't damage this was the only damage. Can you see that? The little burned area. And what was funny is that the church, not funny, haha, but it was odd that the church was being used as a staging area by the fire department. They were on the other side of this building, and the fire department was there. They're ready to fight the fire. They didn't realize that on the back side of the gymnasium, there was a little smoldering fire that happened. They couldn't smell it because there was smoke everywhere. They didn't know that it was happening. And next thing they knew, smoke filled the gymnasium, filled one of the classrooms. It was over $1 million to clean everything up, rent another facility while it was being utilized, pay for this rental property for the school when the school had to rent another facility for their classes to maintain. But it's gotten really, really expensive in California for handling fire claims. And with the inflation that we've seen, has everybody heard about the increased cost of materials and labor and how expensive it is getting for building?
Oh yeah,
it's happening. It's happening at churches too. If something were to happen at your church, it does take a long time, and cities take a long time to get things done. So you want to make sure that you have the appropriate insurance coverage to get you through that, both on ordinance and law issues, and also for extra expense for ministry continuity. So, and I think it's a unique challenge we have here in California that other states don't see it nearly as much as we do here. So it's a conversation to have. Okay. We're getting there. I'm almost done. I'm going to go through just one more thing. And this is a question, Glenn Prescott at Gateway Seminary.
I know Glenn well.
I speak in his class to his students as they're kind of getting ready to leave. And one time he says, how do we budget for maintenance? And I was like, dude, I have no idea. And I'm the insurance guy, but it challenged me. And I was like, what are the guidelines that we should be looking at? And I want to send this to everybody here. And it's, if you look at your insurance policy and what it says, this is kind of the baseline for preventing deferred maintenance, how much we should be budgeting on our facility, how much we should be budgeting for our maintenance team and for repairs and maintenance. And if you look at this church, let me go back a page. This church right here, 84,000 square feet, okay? So if we look at an 84,000 square foot building, if we say it's $250 a square foot, it's a $21 million facility. That means they should be budgeting $420,000 a year for maintenance and repairs. And that's the guidelines put out by it's a national survey of properties for churches. So I think it's wise, we all have committees at churches, but your property committee should be putting together that benchmark report that says, okay, how much should we be spending and how much should we be saving for the eventual replacement of our air conditioning, our roof, our parking lot, things like that.
Deferred maintenance is one of the biggest things we deal with, and when we do count the cost assessments in church revitalization, and because it's not, the money has not been set aside, so that when the AC unit goes out or the roof goes out, then they're caught because they were not prepared for it. So this is a great help, Charlie.
Sure. I think the benchmark report, and I'm going to add this to what we send out. There's a worksheet that you can work through that says put out by Cool Solutions Group, which is, they do a great job on serving ministries that are looking to expand or rebuild or rehab their facility. And they put together a very good free guideline on how to keep track of these things. And, I feel for pastors that, are coming out of seminary and they walk into a facility and it's like, oh, I've got to manage the property. I've got to manage the budget. I've got to manage all of these things. So we try to find ways to pull things off of your plate and out of your inbox and provide you with resources to help you out with those. So you go here. This right here, this is the bonus. We're putting this on the California Southern Baptist Convention website. We're going to try this out for a little while, see how it goes. What it is this is the link, and you'll receive the link. And what we'll have there for you is there's going to be some legal assistance. And so if you send this, if you complete this form, it's just going to ask you a couple of basic things, how to contact you, your email address, things like that. But we'll get a legal review of your forms. Let's say you have your employee handbook. I don't care if it's a mess. Honestly, if it's a mess, send it to us. If you haven't updated it in 20 years, just send it. It gives us something to start from, and then it'll be a checklist of items that you can use to improve it. Same thing with your child protection program. If you're getting ready to send people on a mission trip and you need some permission slips or other forms completed, send those to us as well. And we can have an attorney review those for you. It's usually 2 to 3 days, something like that. And it's not a legal opinion, but it is legal advice from an attorney that works with churches, and there's no charge or anything, and we'll get that to you.
And by the way,
if you have, yes, sir.
By the way, I just sent you the updated list of everyone who registered for this. And so Charlie has your email address, and so you can expect this in your email inbox. Check your spam filter in case it gets caught, or if you need to contact me, we'll make sure that it gets back to you.
Okay. Are you saying that I send out spam, Ralph?
No, you would never do that, Charlie. That would never happen. Never.
Yeah, we send things out, and we're really selective on what we send out because we want to make sure it's not junk. And personally, I never read anything from my insurance agent because it has, he doesn't know what it is that we're doing. But everything that we do is focused on ministry and issues that we're seeing because we spend so much time in this. That we're hearing from ministries that are saying, hey, we're struggling in this area. How do we reopen our church? Or we've got vaccine questions or whatever it might be. And so we get on it and we say, hey, how do we give authoritative and actionable resources? So if you get something from us, it's not going to end up in your spam filter like Ralph threatened.
And in the show, in the chat notes, Roger just posted the Legal Assist connection. You can go to it right now if you're online, copy it and paste it, and then put it in your browser, and you can get that right now.
And if it's a question that you have, what I'll be doing is we'll connect you with an attorney. If it's Q&A or you need some advice, you want to chat with an attorney, I want to tell you, if you're looking for an opinion letter, if you're looking for, some, hours and hours of work, we can't provide that to you from a California attorney that works with religious organizations. But we have a really good relationship with a law firm that spends a lot of time serving churches. He's agreed that for this group today, that if there's questions that come up, if you just want to chat with them for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, he's glad to do so at no charge, anything like that. But so I think it's a really good resource, because what I don't want you to do, I think the most expensive law firm out there is the law firm of Google and Bing. And we do that in churches. We start Googling things and we start looking for our answers there. And we're going, oh, well, this applies to us, or we've got this free form or whatever it might be. Those get really expensive in the long run. And so, we're trying to leverage our relationships with the insurance companies and attorneys here in California to provide you at least a place to start. And we hope you find it valuable.
And let me just say this, Charlie, and you know this too, listen, churches are unique in our ecosystem. And just because you know a guy down the street who's a lawyer doesn't mean that lawyer knows the issues and responds to a church. And churches are very, very unique. So don't just go online and take something that you think is the answer to it. We want to help keep you out of the weeds. So, so Charlie, first of all, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. That email
Are you
list
kicking me
is,
off?
what's that?
Are you kicking me off? Are you cutting me out? Because I got one more thing I wanted to go
Please
over.
do. Please do.
Okay. All right. I wouldn't take it personally. I
No, no,
understand.
no, no,
You know,
no. Please do.
Usually it's the pastors that go long and the attorneys. No, I just one more thing. I just want to give you a recap because I am going to send this out to you, right? We can send this out as a follow-up to everybody. We'll have the links to all of these resources as well. And I just wanted to kind of, hey, and what we should be doing, and it's just kind of a list that we should be looking at.
This
Number
is great.
one, let's
Please.
do it. Yeah, let's annually update and train on these things, on your child protection program and your employee handbook. Things change a lot, and we'll help you with it. You got to have a transportation policy and something with your facility and how to manage that. And then your bylaws, different things like the facility use agreements. I'm going to be sending all of these out to you. And they're all written specifically for ministries in California, Christian ministries in California. And they've been reviewed by attorneys in California. And so don't use the generic things that you can find online. And then also a couple of things you want to look at for making sure you're insuring for the right value of things, looking at code upgrades, extra expenses. And, the last thing here is, review the coverage and limits of the board. This is something that I think periodically that we need to send to the board and say, hey guys, by the way, this is what, Pastor Ralph and I discussed. And these are the limits, because it's ultimately the board's responsibility for the right amount of coverage. And, you don't want to be the only one on the hook for something like that. So, but I'll send all of this to you and I'll stop now. Okay. I stopped sharing too.
No, Charlie, thank you so much. This has been so good. We really, really appreciate this. And we have many more resources at csbc.com. So go to csbc.com and scroll down to Church Revitalization. We want to help resource the vision of your church. So this Zoom session will be posted on our website, and you can share this with others. Our next Church Revitalization Resource Zoom is going to be July 1 with Mike Proud, Director of Missions in Orange County, and Bogdan Kipko, a pastor, on how to use Facebook ads to reach more people in your community. So be expecting that coming up soon. We believe your best days are ahead. So press on in Christ. God bless and have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thanks.